This time, we're diving into some stuff you've been looking into. The systems behind our everyday lives.
Right.
We've got an audiobook excerpt here.
Okay.
And a website all about debt-free sovereignty.
Interesting.
Sounds like you're ready to kind of question how things really work, huh?
Absolutely. You've definitely stumbled onto some pretty unconventional ideas here. One that really jumps out is this whole straw man concept.
Oh, yeah.
This legal theory that you definitely didn't learn in school.
Okay, so let's break this down. This audiobook is claiming there's this whole hidden legal world, and it all revolves around this straw man thing.
Mm-hmm.
They even use the example of your birth certificate, saying that writing your name in all caps is like the first step in creating this separate legal entity.
It's a fascinating claim, and it actually ties into a broader movement sometimes called sovereign citizens.
Okay.
They believe that governments operate under a hidden set of rules, and that by understanding these rules, individuals can basically opt out of things like taxes or licenses.
So it's like they're saying there's a difference between what's legal and what's lawful.
Exactly.
Like driving without a license might be illegal.
Right.
But it's not unlawful according to some higher set of rules.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Okay.
The source is arguing that most of us are unknowingly operating in the legal realm, bound by these statutes we never really consented to.
Interesting.
And they contrast this with what they call common law, which they say is based on, these universal principles of harm and fairness.
It's a really different way of looking at things.
Yeah.
But how does this straw man fit into all of this?
So the source claims that when your birth certificate is issued with your name in all caps, it creates this separate legal entity, the straw man, which the government then uses to interact with you.
Oh, I see.
So you become liable for, taxes, fines, all these obligations. Because of this straw man.
Not as yourself, the individual.
That's where it starts to feel a little conspiracy theory-ish, right?
Right, I can see that.
Like, how can a name in all caps create a whole separate legal entity?
Well, that's where we need to look a little deeper.
Okay.
The legal system does rely on very specific language and procedures. And some people believe there are hidden meanings and loopholes within that language.
So even if we don't buy into the straw man idea, literally, this deep dive is raising some interesting questions about the complexity of legal systems.
Exactly. It highlights how there's potential for misunderstandings and misinterpretations.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with these complex legal concepts.
And this whole idea of opting out, the source material even says things like paying taxes and registering a vehicle are optional because they're based on statutes, not common law. Is that even remotely possible?
Well, it's important to remember that these claims are based on a very specific interpretation of the law. One that's not widely accepted by, legal scholars or the courts.
Right.
While there's always room for debate and interpretation. Within the law, trying to operate outside of the established legal framework can have some serious consequences.
So, well, it's interesting to consider these. Alternative perspective. We should be very cautious about acting on them without a thorough understanding of legal implications. Right?
Absolutely. And that's actually where financial literacy comes in. Understanding the basics of how money, debt, and banking systems work can help you make informed decisions about your finances, regardless of your views on this whole straw man theory.
Right, because the source material also goes into some pretty deep claims about money itself.
Yes.
They're saying it's all based on worthless notes, essentially. Issued by a private company, the Federal Reserve. And they use this court case. Jerome Daly is an example.
Yes, the source claims that Jerome Daly successfully challenged a bank's attempt to foreclose on his home. Interesting. By arguing that the bank hadn't actually put up any real money as collateral for the loan. It's an interesting case, but it's often misrepresented in these types of discussions.
So they're saying banks are creating money out of thin air. Is there any truth to that?
Modern banking systems are complex. And it's true that banks play a role in creating money through lending. However, it's not as simple as just printing money out of nothing. There are regulations and reserve requirements that limit how much money banks can actually create.
So it's more nuanced. The source material presents it.
Definitely. It's crucial to understand that. Money has value because of really complex interplay of factors like trust, government backing, and the overall health of the economy.
Okay, so even if banks aren't literally pulling money out of thin air, there's still a lot of complexity behind how our financial system operates.
Absolutely. And understanding those complexities
can help you make more informed decisions about your own finances. Regardless of your views on the strawman theory. Or the Federal Reserve, so.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around, right? These big systems we usually just take for granted, but this source also goes into history, trying to connect events like wars to this idea of financial control.
I see.
They even talk about accepted for value, which they claim can be used to discharge debt.
Accepted for value is an interesting concept stemming from this idea that financial instruments derive their value from the individual. So it involves sending specific legal-sounding documents to creditors.
Oh, interesting.
Essentially challenging the debt's validity based on the straw man theory.
So they're saying that by asserting you're the source of the value, you can, like, make the debt disappear. That sounds almost too good to be true.
It is important to note that this approach hasn't been widely successful in the courts. Legal systems are built on established procedures and precedents, and trying to circumvent them with unconventional tactics like that is unlikely to get you the results that you want.
So even though the source presents it as a solution, accepted for value is probably not something you would actually recommend trying in real life.
Exactly. While it's fascinating to explore these alternative ideas, it's crucial to understand the potential risks. Financial literacy means not only understanding the systems, but also knowing how to navigate them safely and legally.
Makes sense. Now, what about those historical claims? The source links events like the American Revolution, the Civil War, even Lincoln's assassination, and the creation of the Federal Reserve, all to this idea of a hidden power structure controlling finance.
It's a very intricate narrative, and it's important to remember that historical events are rarely driven by single causes, while financial interests certainly played a role. In many of these events,
attributing everything to a grand conspiracy is a bit of a simplification.
So there's a kernel of truth in the idea that money influences history. But it's not as straightforward as the source suggests.
Precisely. For example, the source claims that President Kennedy's assassination was linked to his attempts to challenge the Federal Reserve by issuing silver-backed United States notes.
Interesting.
While Kennedy did issue some executive orders related to silver certificates, connecting this to his assassination is a huge leap with no solid evidence.
It seems like they're trying to connect all these dots into a single predetermined pattern, even if the evidence doesn't quite add up.
Exactly. It's important to be critical of narratives that offer these overly simplistic explanations for complex events. History is messy, and understanding it requires examining multiple perspectives and acknowledging the interplay of various factors.
Okay, so we should take those historical claims with a grain of salt.
But what about their claims about the petrodollar system? They say the U.S. dollar's dominance is tied to its use as the sole currency for buying oil. And that this motivates U.S. military interventions in oil-rich countries.
The petrodollar concept does have some basis in reality. The U.S. dollar became the primary currency for oil trading in the 1970s, and this arrangement has had significant geopolitical implications. However, the source simplifies what is a complex relationship.
So it's not just as simple as saying the U.S. invades countries solely to protect the dollar status as the oil currency.
While control over oil resources is undoubtedly a factor in global power dynamics, reducing complex conflicts like the wars in Iraq or Libya to a single economic motive overlooks all those intricate political, social, and historical factors at play.
There's another example of where the source offers a compelling narrative, but maybe oversimplifies the reality.
Exactly. It's important to be wary of explanations that fit neatly into a preconceived narrative. The real world is much messier and more nuanced than that.
Now, the source also talks about something called revolution, outlining 3 stages. Ideological resistance, civil disobedience, and even direct physical resistance they seem to be advocating for. Some pretty extreme actions.
It's important to understand the context of these terms as they're presented in the source material. They're not necessarily advocating for violence, but they are suggesting a progression of tactics for challenging the systems that they critique.
So ideological resistance would be like spreading awareness about these alternative ideas, while civil disobedience would involve things like refusing to pay taxes. Or get a driver's license.
And it's important to highlight the potential consequences of such actions. While civil disobedience has played a role in many social justice movements, it often comes with personal risks and legal repercussions.
What about direct physical resistance?
Yeah, that sounds a little concerning. The source doesn't explicitly endorse violence, but they do mention it as a last resort. When other methods have failed, it's a very controversial stance, and it's crucial to understand that. Resorting to violence is a serious decision with potentially far-reaching consequences.
So while it's interesting to consider, these ideas about resistance, we should be very cautious about interpreting them as like a call to action or a justification for violence.
Right? Absolutely. It's important to remember that. Promoting or engaging in violence is illegal. And can have very severe consequences. Peaceful and legal methods of dissent are always preferable.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From strawman theories to alternative financial systems, and even calls for revolution. The source material presents a very different way of looking at the world.
It's a thought-provoking perspective. But it's crucial to approach it with a critical eye. Just because an idea is presented with conviction doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. Or valid.
Right. We need to be careful not to mistake passion for truth. The source clearly believes what they're saying, but that doesn't automatically make their claims factual or their solutions practical.
Exactly. Critical thinking involves questioning everything, even ideas that resonate with our own beliefs or desires. We need to be willing to challenge our own assumptions and be open to considering alternative perspectives.
So how should we approach these unconventional ideas and claims? What are the key takeaways from this deep dive?
The first takeaway is the importance of skepticism. We need to be wary of narratives that offer simple explanations for complex problems. The world is messy, and understanding it requires examining multiple perspectives and considering the interplay of various factors.
So don't just accept everything you read or hear at face value, even if it sounds convincing, or appeals to your emotions. Do your own research, consult reputable sources, and be willing to challenge your own biases.
Exactly. And the second takeaway is the value of financial literacy. Regardless of your views on the straw man theory or the Federal Reserve, understanding how money, debt, and banking systems work is essential for navigating the modern world.
So even if we disagree with them, the source's conclusions, this deep dive can serve as a reminder to educate ourselves about finance and become more informed participants in the systems that shape our lives.
Absolutely. Financial literacy empowers individuals to make better decisions, protect their interests, and potentially even advocate for changes they believe in.
And speaking of changes, the source material also gets into some pretty wild claims about suppressed technologies.
Like what?
They mention things like free energy devices.
Oh, wow.
And vehicles that can supposedly run on water.
Is there any truth to those claims?
They mention specific examples, like Herman Plassen's device for pulling energy from the air. And Robert Adams' self-running motor generator.
It's important to approach such claims with a healthy dose of skepticism. If these technologies were as revolutionary and viable as claimed, wouldn't they have gained wider adoption despite any alleged suppression?
It's like they're presenting this whole alternative reality where everything we think we know about government, finance, even history is just a carefully constructed illusion.
It is a very compelling narrative. And I can see how people would get drawn into it. There's a certain appeal to feeling like you're in the know, you know, privy to secret knowledge that most people aren't aware of.
But as we've discussed, it's crucial to approach these claims with a critical eye and not just accept them blindly.
Exactly. Blind faith in any ideology, even one that presents itself as anti-establishment or revolutionary, can be dangerous.
Now, they do offer this roadmap. for challenging this supposed system, right?
Right.
They talk about these 3 stages of revolution.
It's important to understand that. Their idea of revolution isn't necessarily about violent overthrow or anything like that.
Okay.
They frame it more as a process of raising awareness, withdrawing consent, and ultimately building a new system based on their principles.
So the first stage, ideological resistance, is about spreading the word.
Yeah.
Getting people to see things from their perspective.
Exactly. They believe that. Once enough people understand the truth as they see it, the system will start to crumble.
Interesting.
From within.
And then civil disobedience comes in.
Right.
Where people refuse to participate in the system.
Right.
By not paying taxes, getting licenses, or complying with regulations.
Right. And they acknowledge that this can have consequences.
Yeah.
They present it as a form of sacrifice, a willingness to face personal hardship for the sake of a greater cause.
But they also mentioned that third stage, direct physical resistance.
Yeah.
That's where things get a little murky.
It's definitely the most controversial aspect of their ideology. They don't explicitly advocate for violence, but they do present it as a potential last resort when all other options have been exhausted.
It's a slippery slope, right? Once you start justifying violence, it's hard to know where to draw the line.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that resorting to violence often has unintended consequences and can lead to more suffering than it alleviates.
So even if we agree that the systems we live in are flawed and need to change, violence is probably not the answer.
Right. There are always peaceful and legal ways to advocate for change, even within imperfect systems.
Well, this deep dive has certainly been a journey.
It has.
We've explored some unconventional ideas, challenged some assumptions, and maybe even learned a thing or two about ourselves in the process.
It's been a fascinating exploration of the human desire to understand the world and our place in it.
Right.
And even though we might not agree with everything the source material presents, it does highlight some important questions about power, control, and the systems that shape our lives.
So what are the key takeaways you would want the listener to walk away with from this deep dive?
First and foremost, the importance of critical thinking. Don't just accept information blindly, no matter how appealing or authoritative it might seem. Question everything. Do your own research and be willing to challenge your own biases.
Right. And even if you disagree with it, a particular perspective, try to understand where it's coming from and what might be driving those beliefs.
Exactly. And the second takeaway is the value of knowledge, especially when it comes to complex systems like finance and government. The more you understand how things work, the better equipped you are to navigate them effectively and advocate for changes you believe in.
So even though this deep dive took us down some unconventional path, ultimately it's about empowering you, the listener, to become a more informed and engaged participant in the world.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. And the more you know, the more power you have to shape your own destiny.
Well said. And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you found it thought-provoking. And maybe even a little bit challenging.
As always, we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, questioning everything, and never stop learning.
Until next time, keep diving deep.